Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. This is the Fast Friday edition of the show for June 11th, 2021. And today I'm talking about Alexander Hamilton. And I'm going to give an overview of one of his worst, there are many, but this is one of his worst flip-flops, his implied powers doctrine in order to get the first bank of the U.S., the first central bank, the first national bank. This was a complete 180 from what Hamilton argued in favor of during the ratification debates over the Constitution. And we're living with the results of this flip-flop, this implied powers doctrine today, the largest government in the history of the world. But first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage has everything you need to follow this program, all the archives for about 3 years now. On individual episodes, I include links and references to other stuff that you can read and learn more on your own time. You can find all the platforms, the video platforms, the audio-only podcast edition, and even our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month, and we make it go a long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. That show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one, I can't thank you enough. But since it's Fast Friday, I promise to not take up too much of your time. Let's see if I can get this info out to you in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And I want to start out with a warning from this guy, Thomas Jefferson. And this was from his opinion on the constitutionality of a national bank, arguing against Hamilton and others, saying that the federal government simply was never delegated a power to do this. And if they did it anyways, it would lead to a lot of problems. This is Jefferson in February of 1791. And he said to take a single step beyond the boundaries thus specially drawn around the powers of Congress is to take possession of a boundless field of power, no longer susceptible of any definition. And Jefferson was really just reiterating, this is something he was so good at, reiterating something that was commonly understood amongst so many people, so many founders, so many old revolutionaries. They recognized that soon as you allowed government to take even the smallest step beyond what they were authorized to do, this would set a precedent for more and more and more and more until it became, as Jefferson put it, a boundless field of power. And that brings me to this article, short article we just published by Mike Meharry a few days ago, and he put it this way. Like most supporters of the Constitution, Alexander Hamilton promised that the new federal government would only be able to exercise powers expressly enumerated in the document, in the Constitution itself. Here he is, for example, in Federalist Paper number 32. Hamilton put it this way: but as the plan of the convention aims only at a partial union or consolidation, the state governments would clearly retain all the rights of sovereignty which they before had, and which were not by that act exclusively delegated to the United States. So the act, the Constitution, the federal government would only have those powers, as Hamilton put it, exclusively delegated to the United States. And here he is again in almost the same type of an argument in the New York Ratifying Convention, June 28, 1788. And he put it this way. He sounds kind of like a Jeffersonian or a Madison, where he's saying that there is a real, very strict line in the sand. The federal government only gets to do the stuff that's been delegated to it in the document, and everything else it can't touch. And here's how he put it in June 1788. Whatever is not expressly given to the federal head is reserved to the members. So they can only do those things which have been expressly delegated to the federal government. But as Meharry put it, he said it didn't take Hamilton long to change his tune. Less than 3 years after the ratification of the Constitution, Hamilton discovered implied powers hidden in the Constitution to justify Congress chartering the first bank of the United States, the first national bank, the first central bank. It's really the precursor to what we live under today. And the reason that Mike wrote this article, and I thought it was a good idea to do this episode to just give a brief introduction on this, is because Mike has been wrapping up, and both of us have done a lot of research on this over the years, but heavily Meharry, way more than I have. But he's wrapping up a new ebook and handbook project tentatively titled The Federal Reserve, or the Fed versus the Constitution, where he talks about how the Federal Reserve is the engine that drives the most powerful government in the history of the world today. But he ties it back to the arguments that Hamilton made in support of it to charter the first national bank of the United States, the first bank of the U.S., and the arguments that Thomas Jefferson, Edmund Randolph, and James Madison gave against it, that they argued that it was not authorized by the Constitution. But I think this is going to be a great project. We're going to have it available for TAC members, which of course you could sign up for at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members for as little as $2 a month. But that'll be available for free as an ebook for all of our members, probably by the end of this month. And then sometime after that, we'll make a print and ebook available for the rest of the general public. So keep an eye out on that. Anyways, going further, here is... where are we back to here? That was Meharry. Now we're going to Alexander Hamilton. Now, this is his opinion as to the constitutionality of the first bank of the United States. Now, he started out saying that during the ratification debates that the federal government would only have those powers exclusively delegated or expressly delegated to it. Now, a few years later, he has a different view, and he says, it is not denied that there are implied as well as express powers. So now they just had expressly delegated powers before. A few years later, he wants to get something done. He wants a central bank. So now all of a sudden, there are implied powers. He even put it in his own words. He says, and that the former are as effectually delegated as the latter. Now, James Madison warned against this implied powers doctrine. The doctrine of implication is what he called it. He says the danger of it has been felt in other governments. The delicacy was felt in the adoption of our own. The danger may also be felt if we do not keep close to our chartered authorities. He was taking the position, just like Jefferson, just like Randolph, that chartering a bank was not something that was delegated to the federal government. And if you listen to my episode, James Madison versus the National Bank, he specifically pointed out that he actually, during the Philadelphia Convention, Madison himself proposed, now I don't think he pointed it out in this debate, but we know that Madison himself actually proposed that the federal government would have a power to incorporate. And this was rejected. So it wasn't even considered by the people of the several states that the federal government would have the power to grant charters of incorporation. So he's saying this is just an implied power. They're all recognizing what Hamilton is doing here, and he's being a little kind in this instance, but pointing out how dangerous it might be. Now, here's Meharry again. He says, of course, this very notion contradicts Hamilton's ratification era argument that Congress was limited to its enumerated powers. The idea that only expressly delegated powers suddenly changed to implied and expressly, as Hamilton himself separated, pointing out that they were kind of two different ones, but now they were one and the same. He went on to argue, Mike writes, that Congress is authorized to create a corporation because this implied power is necessary and proper. So now anything and everything is necessary and proper. And Meharry points out that Hamilton drove his point home, insisting that the word necessary doesn't literally mean necessary. They included the word necessary, but they didn't mean necessary, but can simply mean needful, requisite, or even just incidental, useful, or conducive. So something that was going to be necessary and proper, the doctrine of the legal doctrine that the founding generation understood of principles and incidents, basically a principal power delegated. If they couldn't exercise that power without the incidental, not implied, the incidental power, the lesser power, then of course they can do it. It's like, I decide to own a little corner market and I hire a manager to do that. Well, I don't have to spell out that he has the power to hire people to run the store or to create a schedule or maybe get a cleaning crew or things like that, or bring in inventory. These are all incidental powers to the larger powers. They aren't somehow implied that he might be able to do something completely different. That's a side note on that. But so Hamilton was really shifting the narrative on this. Instead of being necessary and proper for carrying out the delegated powers, he was basically saying anything, needful, requisite, or even just incidental, useful, or conducive, as Meharry put it. And Meharry takes it a little further. He says, in effect, Hamilton conjured up an almost unlimited reservoir of power the general government can dip into in order to take whatever actions it deems appropriate or necessary, of course. Again, he says this was a 180-degree reversal from the position he took during the ratification debates when he insisted that the new general government would only have the authority to exercise its expressly delegated powers. He says, while Hamilton's arguments may have won the day, surprisingly, and I still need to figure out why, George Washington signed this. Here's a Virginian. Hamilton, of course, they knew each other a long time, a New Yorker, but Washington, his longtime friends and allies, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. Now, Madison himself actually drafted the potential veto message for this, so he relied on Madison that much where he said, hey, put this together on 2 different versions for me, and Madison did that. Edmund Randolph was his AG, and he still went against all of his longtime Virginians and went on and signed the bill into law that Hamilton pushed for. So I don't know, but they betrayed. This argument betrayed the Constitution, and as Mike puts it, we're living with the consequences of it to this day. His implied powers doctrine set the stage for much of the federal overreach we live under right now, and that overreach is the largest government in the history of the world. Now, even John Adams warned against this type of thing. He was one of them when he was one of the good guys during the Revolutionary time. Here in 1775, writing as Novanglis number 3, February 6, 1775, he put it this way. He said, nip the shoots of arbitrary power in the bud is the only maxim which can ever preserve the liberties of any people. When the people give way, their deceivers, betrayers, and destroyers press upon them so fast that there is no resisting afterwards. He was warning us that soon as you see an additional piece of power that they're not supposed to be exercising, that's arbitrary power, not delegated, it's arbitrary, you have to cut it off right then and there. It's basically the same message that Jefferson wrote some years later. To take a single step would create a scenario where you have a boundless field of power. That's the exact same thing that Adams was talking about some years earlier. And he goes on, Adams put it this way, the nature of the encroachment upon the American Constitution is such as to grow every day more and more encroaching. Like a cancer, it eats faster and faster every hour. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. It's a quick take on this really nasty flip-flop from one of the worst guys that was in favor of the largest, most expansive government that you could come up with at the time. And of course, it set the stage for the largest and most expansive government in the history of the world today. And we certainly are feeling the pain of that all around us. Again, I hope you found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope you learned something. I will link to all this stuff, these articles, the original source documents, and the like over in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. If you support the show, you want to help us out, make sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform. Smash the like button on YouTube, Facebook, and elsewhere. Leave comments in the archives. All that stuff triggers the algorithm of the platform, and it tells that platform to show the program to more people. And of course, there's our membership program. You can subscribe on a monthly basis for as little as $2 a month. We also have annual memberships where you're going to get one of these pretty cool 110% plastic Tenther cards with your name and membership number on the back. We personalize each and every one of them. I mean, it's a sticker, but I think it's still pretty cool. Again, that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Do not feel obligated to do that. We're going to continue doing the show and all the work that we do for free and make all the educational information available to all of you in time. But if you're able to kick in financially, I'd be extremely grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Again, I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.